Welcome to everyone, and I'm Chris Bensch. This is Black Toys and Toymakers, the story of Shindana. I'm Chief Curator here at the Strong Museum, and we're delighted that you've joined us for this special virtual discussion with a panel of experts on the history and significance of Shindana Toys. Our guests will delve into the story of Shindana's creation and evolution, the company's role in the community, their products and examples of Black entrepreneurship. It will be followed by a question and answer session. Throughout this presentation, please feel free to share your questions and thoughts in the chat box so that they're ready for the Q&A period. My strong colleague, Shane Reinwald, will be gathering your inquiries and will have them ready for our panel's response. For any of you who might not be familiar with the Strong Museum or Shindana Toys, its products or their significance, here's a short video that will provide you with an overview.
The Strong Museum in Rochester, New York is the only collections-based museum in the world devoted solely to the topic and history of play. In 2019, the Strong welcomed almost 600,000 guests to enjoy its educational and interactive exhibits that cover everything from Sesame Street to the role of women in the world of video games. Known widely as the nation's Museum of Play, the Strong blends the best features of both history museums and children's museums to explore the ways in which play encourages learning, creativity, and discovery, and illuminates cultural history. The museum is home to the International Center for the History of Electronic Games, the National Toy Hall of Fame, the World Video Game Hall of Fame, the Brian Sutton Smith Library and Archives of Play, and the American Journal of Play. With more than 515,000 items in its holdings, the Strong houses the world's largest and most comprehensive collection of historical materials related to play. Things like toys, dolls, board games, video games, and pinball machines.
The Strong National Museum of Play is invested in histories of play, and the story of Shandana is a really important one. It tells a history of inclusion, of empowerment, and of activism. Shindana Toys was formed in 1968, and at its height, it offered the most comprehensive list of products created for Black children. We're talking toys, dolls, action figures, plushies, even board games. Shindana Toys really championed Black representation, not just in the toys that they created, but greater representation for the toy industry too.
My name is Michelle Parnett Dwyer, and I'm a curator. We are looking at our collection of Shindana Toys. This collection is really important because it marked a turning point in the toy and doll industry. Before that, it really was geared towards white families and white children, and there was not much on the market for other kids. This was really important for us to collect and to have a representative sample of all their products. The majority of things you see here are their dolls. We'll start on this side. We have Baby Nancy, who was recently inducted into the Toy Hall of Fame. She was their first product, so that's a really special doll to have. And you also see a few baby dolls here. One was Asian and one is Hispanic. They did sort of go out and branch out and did things other than Black dolls at some points. And we have Baby Zuri, who is also a really special doll in their line. In the middle here, we have the fashion dolls and our action figure. Disco Wanda was sort of a play on Barbie. She was very career-oriented. She came with different accessories. We also have the flight attendant. There were a few other variations of Wanda. Slade was a really special action figure in their line because they wanted him to be a super secret agent that solved crimes without violence. So he used his knowledge and other resources. He never resorted to violence, and that was something that was really important to the company. And over here we have a few of their celebrity dolls. We have JJ, Talking JJ Walker, Geraldine, which was modeled after Flip Wilson's popular character. and Marla Gibbs from The Jefferson Show. And these were all really important because each show had a message about poverty, race relations. They used really great humor to tackle some very challenging subjects.
I'm Chris Bensch, Chief Curator at the Strong Museum. I'm here to talk about Baby Nancy, this important doll right next to me who was inducted into the National Toy Hall of Fame in November 2020. Baby Nancy's induction was perfect for the year 2020, a year when, like never before, Americans were concerned with issues of racial equity and fairness. Baby Nancy's introduction in 1968 made her so significant because she was a black doll who looked like black children and was marketed to black children. She wasn't just a white doll with extra color in her mold. That made her the groundbreaker for all the diverse dolls and toys that have followed ever since. Okay, now let me tell you a little bit about our four presenters today. Marva Smith Maxey helped found and run Operation Bootstrap Incorporated, Shindana's parent organization, in 1965, along with Lou Smith and Robert Hall. A longtime community organizer in Los Angeles ever since, she was featured in the 2019 documentary on Shindana Toys, produced by KCET Television in California. David Crittendon is an educator, musician, activist, and historian. He's the author of the soon-to-be-released novel, Then See If I Care, a story about Bessie Smith. He participated with Lou Smith during 1964's Mississippi Freedom Summer and the Northern Campaign in New York City in 1965. He's a member of the Mamie A. Clayton Library and Museum, the Claiming Freedom Symposium commemorating the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer at Cal State LA, and was featured in KCET's documentary about Baby Nancy and the enduring legacy of Shindana Toys as a locus of community pride, economic development, and social equity. Yolanda Hester is a historian, archivist, educator, and author who holds an MA degree in African American Studies from UCLA. She was featured in the 2019 documentary as well and has published on Black doll history, as well as the history of Black businesses in America. Rob Goldberg is a historian and faculty member at St. Anne's School in Brooklyn, New York. He has written about Shindana for the Los Angeles Times and is currently writing a book on the politics of toys in the 1960s and 70s. He holds a PhD in American history from the University of Pennsylvania. Together, the four members of our panel came together in 2019 to form the Operation Bootstrap History Collaborative in order to discuss, document, and share the extraordinary story of Operation Bootstrap, an innovative community development and job training organization founded in the aftermath of the Watts Rebellion in 1965. Through research and public outreach initiatives, the collaborative aims to restore Operation Bootstrap's history, including that of its largest and most successful business venture, Shindana Toys, to the narrative of Black freedom struggle in America. I'm honored to have all four of you on our panel today. And one more reminder to our audience to please put your questions in the chat box for the Q&A that will follow. With all of that as a preface, let's start with Baby Nancy, the landmark doll whose induction into the National Toy Hall of Fame provided the impetus for this discussion today. And with that in mind, I'd like to invite Yolanda Hester to start our conversation.
Thank you so much, Christopher. And I want to thank the Strong Museum and everyone at the Strong and Christopher and Kathy for having us, and everyone who's come to hear this story and hear about this story today. Thank you for being here. I want to start with saying that Baby Nancy was a doll of protest and that she came out of protests. She was a doll of Black power and an expression of people power and community power. And that It's really impossible to understand the full historical significance of the Baby Nancy doll and the Shindana Toy Company without understanding the events that led to them. The Watts Rebellion, which happened in August in 1965, it's often talked about in the context of the fires and the burning and, this singular police incident that exploded. But actually, it was a culmination of many, many years of economic negligence and different disenfranchisement, unfair housing practices. I mean, only a few years prior did California voters repeal the Rumford Fair Housing Act, which prohibited discrimination. It was the community, and all of these issues were imposed on communities in South LA, which includes Watts. The community was also dealing with high unemployment because of segregation and racially restrictive covenants. There was a degree of economic isolation. They were also dealing with police brutality. And the community had been protesting and fighting these injustices for quite some time. But all of these factors kind of created the perfect stew that eventually became the rebellion. But what is less talked about when we think about the community is that it had also had a long tradition of self-help, community support, and cooperative support. So in the aftermath of the rebellion, they continued this. And people even outside the community felt called to action, but particularly people in the community came together to sort of create and form a number of organizations and institutions to address some of the issues that was happening in South LA and Watts. And one of those organizations was Operation Bootstrap. Operation Bootstrap was a grassroots community self-help organization that it mostly offered job training and education classes. And as it grew, it added more services. It was started by two activists who had met at a CORE meeting, the Congress of Racial Equality. Lou Smith was a member of CORE and had been involved in CORE in the sort of northeast region of the country, and had been in Mississippi during Freedom Summer and had been transferred to the Los Angeles area. And Robert Hall was a local activist who was also a member of CORE, and he helped found NVAC, the Nonviolent Action Committee that was doing work on the ground. And the two of them came together to really kind of address some issues in response to the rebellion. And they kind of took the slogan of "Burn, Baby, Burn," which was the slogan of the rebellion, and reframed it to "Learn, Baby, Learn," and created Operation Bootstrap. And Operation Bootstrap was created in conjunction with the community. From what I know from some of the documentation, they actually polled the community to get the community's input in how they would sort of shape and form Operation Bootstrap and what services it offered. As time went on, it started to make an impact, and this impact was noticeable. And at different points, Operation Bootstrap would get visits from politicians and officials. They really wanted to see what was happening down in South LA and what all this energy was about. Operation Bootstrap was also getting attention from the media, and especially the Black press. The LA Sentinel and Chicago Defender were writing about Operation Bootstrap. But also some mainstream newspapers such as, the LA Times and the New York Times. In the beginning, the organization received most of its funding through donations. And it had established a number of sort of, out camps called the Friends of Bootstrap. And they were smaller organizations, smaller groups of people located in better, funded neighborhoods that were sort of upper middle class neighborhoods, mostly white. And there were members of those communities who believed in the cause and wanted to support what Operation Bootstrap was doing. And so they helped with some of the support and they helped with some of the fundraising. But also, as Operation Bootstrap was getting attention, there were public funds that became available. But philosophically, both for the organization and for Lou Smith and Robert Hall, they were very defiant about not accepting public money, city, state, or federal funding. They wanted to maintain their independence and autonomy. And also at that time, there was some suspicion about government funds in the Black community. Nonetheless, they needed to find ways to financially sustain their cause. And one of the things that they did was that they branched out in entrepreneurial activities. And so people from the community would have an idea about a business that they would want to operate and bring it to Operation Bootstrap, and there would be some help in forming that business. And so at some point, there was a gas station and a clothing shop called Bootstrings, and there was a manufacturing of African textiles. There was a daycare, a print shop. There were a number of different businesses, and they were fairly successful. But their biggest success was the Shindana Toy Company. And I won't go into how this organization decided to get into the toy business, because I think Marva and David are going to speak on that later. But I want to share two important aspects of Shandana and Operation Bootstrap to conclude. And that is that both organizations were founded in the 60s. And just keep in the back of your mind what was happening in the 60s. All of the political turmoil, the tragic assassinations, alongside the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the emergence of the Black Panthers, and then nationally, also in the Black community, there was the Black arts movement, and locally there was a community arts movement. And all of these forces, all of these movements and ideas helped shape both Operation Bootstrap and Shandana. Another significant point that I want to leave with is that there's a lot of focus on the baby Nancy doll, which there should be. She was really groundbreaking. But there was another significance to the Shindana Toy Company, and that is that the manufacturing company was a community-driven affair. Shindana Toys was located right in the heart of the community. It was on 61st and Central Avenue. Operation Bootstrap's office was on 40th, 41st and Central. And they were right in community. It employed majority of its staff from people in the community. And at one point it had about 75 employees, and most of them came from the community. And community members made the clothes of the dolls. They made, artist Jim Totley sculpted the head of the doll. They had a lot of say, and they weighed in and really shaped Shindana Toys, which would ultimately become the largest manufacturer of Black toys in the country. So I'll leave you there.
Thanks, Yolanda. And let's pass the baton over to Marva and David to take us into some personal reflections about the early days of Operation Bootstrap and Shindana Toys. Thanks to you both.
Hello. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. This is David Crittendon with
Marva Smith Maxey. And we're here to talk old history with us, long history, involved history. And thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to reminisce, and also hopefully to give a better idea of the significance of Operation Bootstrap and Shindana. And for some reason, we're getting knocking on the door, which is interrupting.
The world is beating your forward.
Yeah, that's our purpose, is to illustrate and share the incredible story of Bootstrap and Shindana. Where would you like us to begin?
Oh, please describe your roles and your place in observing and participating in this particular history.
For myself, the story starts in Freedom Summer in 1964. That's where I met Lou and Marva. This was I think for both of us, a life-changing event. I had never been in the South before. I never really understood what the full meaning of institutionalized racism was until we landed in Mississippi. It was a harsh and dangerous wake up. It certainly showed me what it meant to be a Black person in America. Before, I think I had my identity and all of that to a certain level, but I was not aware of the historical context that a place like Mississippi represented and lived. It was a closed society that had no respect for the Constitution or the Bill of Rights insofar as the safety and history of Black Americans was concerned. And it was a strong reminder that if one doesn't know one's history, then he or she will be cheated and in danger within the society. Marva?
And along with that, after our stay in Mississippi, which was a harrowing one for many of us, we came out of that situation more aware and more alive in terms of wanting to do something for the communities from which we came. And it became important to us to continue the fight that had been started in Mississippi, and particularly with, at that time, getting the vote for everyone and ensuring that people understood, that was their right. And it was part of, participating in our society as a whole, to give, the only thing that you could give without being charged for many people until we, got rid of the poll taxes and so forth in the South, which people were burdened with, and many of them had not even attempted to go into try to vote because they were just not sure that it would even matter at that time. So we came north again and began to work in our various communities. But as time went on, Lou Smith, who later became my husband, was called on to do work in California with CORE and to lead the West Coast region. We established ourselves in Los Angeles and began to work from there with the CORE chapter. And there were things going on within the chapter that Lou was sent out to help ameliorate. And that's when Robert Hall was president of the Los Angeles chapter. And he and Lou met with James Farmer, who was chairman of CORE at the time, to try to straighten out some of differences that were happening with the Los Angeles chapter. And once they met, Robert Hall decided, well, he wanted to, do something else, and he pulled away and started NVAC, which was another civil rights movement working in the community with people. He and Lou were basically on the same wavelength in terms of what they wanted to see for the community in Los Angeles. And they got together a number of times before deciding to pull together with a new organization called Operation Bootstrap. And with that formation came, the involvement with, now we have to include the community in this. What are they looking for? What do we need to work with to get what they need? And that's how we began to interact with a number of people from all walks of life in Los Angeles, talking with and interacting with community, political leaders, civil leaders, and the community itself, people who lived in South Los Angeles. And we were able to come together and be of like mind in what we wanted to see for the community. And this was a very interesting time because all kinds of people, we had a little storefront that we were basically operating from right in the community. And we talked to anybody who would come in, and we had people coming in all the time, just off the street, wanting to know, what are you doing? What's this all about? And when we would initially tell them that, we wanted to open up a job training center, that became primary for many people in the community because the community was so disenfranchised in terms of work, social being, and just feeling a part of the city. The community was isolated in many ways. And when they understood that we were talking about bringing something to them that would help, open the community up to everybody and to them particularly, that's when we got an influx of people who just wanted to be a part, not only for themselves, but for the improvement of the community, improvement of themselves and their families. And from there, once the job training center was set up, and initially, we had a few areas that we were covering, typing, simple reading classes, simple how do you fill out a resume, and classes that we later added were more skilled classes that people came to our facility and helped teach, these classes. Once the word was out in the city that, we were doing this, many people volunteered to come help teach, in some of these classes, and they brought their skills and their ability to the community. And we had classes that ran all day and all evening for the community, with people coming from all over the city to help teach in these classes. From there, there were other people coming in. Not only were they just looking for jobs or looking for skills to learn, who had ideas of their own in terms of building their own business, being entrepreneurs, and it's in something, and they wanted to get help with this. And the more they learned about what we were doing at Operation Bootstrap, the more people came in, with various interests and various skills themselves who wanted to begin their own businesses. And that's how we got into, owning a gas station and sewing factory and doing some of the interesting things that many people had wanted to do on their own, but had no direction.
And why toys?
Out of that, we had people who were volunteering to teach these classes, and in various on various subjects and in various places. And many of those people had come to what we call our sensitivity sessions once a week, who were open to bringing their skills into the community. And as a part of that group, a couple of people from Mattel had attended some of our sessions. And as we were talking about with various people from outside the community about expanding our businesses, a couple of people from Mattel said, well, why don't you do a doll thing? They suggested it. And then we said, okay, well, that's interesting. Can we get your help? And they said, yeah, of course. And we were specific on what we wanted in terms of doing a doll or doing dolls, period. And that was that we wanted to be representative. We wanted them to be representative of the community, what they looked like, what they were capable of, what they did. And we were introduced to the president of Mattel at the time, who was very open and very willing to, listen to what it was that and how it was that we wanted to do this and why. And given the articulation of Lou Smith and Robert Hall at that time, they were able to, convince the president of Mattel very convincingly. And after many meetings, he said that it sounded feasible that Mattel could work with Operation Bootstrap and develop, a doll or two, and from that relationship, we brought in people who, could design, or make figures of what it was that we were envisioning.
Molds and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And
there's specialized technology, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And at that time, in the 60s, early 60s, there was very little in terms of technology in the community, or that many people knew about. So the information and the resources that we were getting from Mattel in those very early stages was significant because it took us down a path to success, and the advice was so precise and direct that there was no way we could have really gone wrong if we listened to the experts. And so as a part of that, we found, in the months, ensuing, a place that we could make this stuff a factory. We were looking for something in the community. And at that time, there were many buildings not far from where our training center was that were vacant. So we were able to, within blocks of our training center, find a factory that would be appropriate for making dolls in the community with people from the community. And that's where other training came in also, because many of these people who initially worked for us were not skilled on any level to work a factory making dolls in the community. So it became a very interesting interaction once people learned, here's someplace they could work in the community, earn money, and hopefully, succeed in making their lives better for them and their kids and families, So it evolved, basically, the factory Shindana Toys evolved from people we had interacted with from outside that initial community where the factory ended up. And with their assistance and guidance in many areas, we were able to pull off and develop a wonderful place for people to work and wonderful dolls, for the world to partake of.
Did you get guidance on distribution and marketing,
yes.
things like that?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Those were areas that we had little expertise in ourselves. And with the guidance, once again, from Mattel, they trained and guided people that were brought into Shindana in those areas. And they initially guided them and basically, set up the way they were going to work in the future with Shindana Toys. So yeah, all of that initially came from the Mattel organization.
Well, I see that there is so much more we can talk about, and some fascinating looking questions are showing up in the chat. So maybe we'll pause there and pass things on to Rob so that we have time for lots of questions and more informal conversation with our audience as well. Thank you so much, Marva and David.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Strong, and thanks everybody here. And I'm just, I'm learning new things as Marva speaks myself and taking notes all over my script. So thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here and among my colleagues in particular. What I want to focus on in my remarks is another important context in which Shandana operated that we haven't discussed yet, and that's the radical social visions of the 60s and 70s referred to by Yolanda, but more specifically, this importance of child rearing, including toys in those efforts to change the world. For instance, peace activists during this time not only mobilized against the Vietnam War, they also organized protests against the country, across the country to end the sale of war toys, like toy guns and tanks and soldiers, which were incredibly popular during this time and even advertised on television. A similar passion for parental politics animated the new feminist uprising, of women's liberation in the 70s. Activists were calling for an end to sexist stereotypes in toys and all of the toy advertising, which was divided into girls' toys and boys' toys. And Black dolls were part of these demands too. Civil rights activists of all races called for the increased production and greater visibility of Black dolls in stores. More and more the big companies during the late 60s were producing Black dolls, but that wasn't enough. You needed wholesalers to purchase them. Then you needed the retailers to actually buy them, and even further than that, you needed them to actually place it on the shelves so the consumers saw them there. And it wasn't really until the industry saw that Black dolls could be profitable, that Black consumers and non-Black consumers alike wanted a more sort of racially diverse doll box, that Black dolls gained a presence in most large retailers. Now, one of the unique contributions Shandana made to this demand for Black dolls and a new kind of Black doll was to say that getting Black dolls into kids' hands wasn't enough. It's one thing for all these big companies to start putting some brown paint or tint into their, their usual mold for the white dolls. That was one thing, and that's, a good start, but it also mattered what the doll looked like. And so Shindana's distinctive process for designing and producing Black dolls, which was led, as Yolanda said, by the Black sculptor James Totley, was in many ways utterly trailblazing. At the center of that design was a radical conception of Black authenticity that came straight out of the Black arts movement. And the Black arts movement was important for lots of reasons, but one of the things that the artists and writers and poets who spearheaded that movement called for was a new Black aesthetic to counter dominant standards of beauty and artistic value in which white bodies had long been portrayed as the ideal human form. Shindana challenged that in every dimension, literally. They based their head molds, for instance, on drawings of local Black children by local Black children in the community, so that these dolls would look like Black kids in ways that no Black doll had ever done before. Previously, as Chris Bensch had mentioned in the video, Black dolls were made by adding the brown color to the plastic, but they basically used the same mold as before. And that mold had been created by an expert sculptor, but that expert sculptor had been looking at photographs of white children in order to make it. Shindana also achieved other firsts as it celebrated Black culture, identity, and community. It produced the first Black dolls with afros, and it proudly called its second version of Baby Nancy, which had an afro, Natural Nancy. The company even imported a special oven from Italy to create that particular texture. And no other doll then or since has ever been able to actually achieve that particular and realistic texture for simulating certain kinds of hair texture. The company was also the first to use African rather than European names for its dolls. In this case, it used Swahili names like Malaika and Temu and Zuri. And like with naming the second Baby Nancy, Natural Nancy, the company made sure that kids knew what they were doing. So they would translate the names, these Swahili names, into English on the packages, so the kids know what the words meant. They said Malaika means angel. They said Tamu means sweet. And so there was this continuation of that motto of learn, baby, learn, of education, and specifically of education in African-American history and Black history more globally at the center of this doll project. Malaika was one of the dolls that was actually dressed in different African clothing styles, from West African dashikis, which originate in Nigeria, to East African deras, which are popular in Kenya. So this is not just a mainstream company at the time saying that, putting a multicolored cloth on a doll and saying they're wearing Afro-style clothes, as many companies tried to do as a way to capitalize on, the fashion of the time. This was a company where the designers were really looking at, okay, what do different, diverse African peoples wear? They wear different things in Nigeria than they wear in Kenya, and we're going to represent that that broad spectrum of African identity and African culture. Finally, at a time when black dolls were assigned a second-class status by most toy companies, which listed them as colored versions or Negro versions of their white dolls. No company ever called its white dolls white, but they always listed the black dolls as the black version of Chatty Cathy, the black version of Baby Giggles, or whatever the doll happened to be named. Shandana explicitly marketed its dolls as black with a capital B. It was the first company ever to do so. But if Shindana rewrote the rules of representation in Toyland, it was also carrying on a long tradition of black toy making dating back to the 19th century, which is also really important to recognize. During an era when the only toy representations of black people were racist minstrel characters, ordinary black women would find whatever cloth or rags or old clothes they could discover amongst their things, and they'd craft their own appealing dolls for the youngest family members. In the 1920s and 30s, as Yolanda has actually written about, black leaders like Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois all called for the commercial production of black dolls to counter the racist messaging in American life. Those calls actually led to the founding of the first black-owned firms in the American toy business, and all of them, not surprisingly, specialized in black dolls because none of the white toy industry would make them. Of course, the 1920s and 30s also saw the birth of the New Negro movement and the Harlem Renaissance, and those doll businesses, they need to be seen as part of that broader celebration of black identity and culture. In the same way, I would argue, and we would argue, that we need to look at Shindana's dolls as products and as tools of their own historical era's revitalized movements for civil rights, for black pride. In other words, Shindana was doing something totally new and also something old. Yes, its story reminds us of the dogged endurance of white supremacy in American culture, and especially, and maybe most nefariously and troublingly, in American children's culture. But the history also offers us something more inspiring. It's a story of creativity and success against very great odds, a story of how the men and women of Watts turned the dreams of their community into black empowerment and black power alike. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks to all our panelists, Marva Smith Maxey, David Crittendon, Yolanda Hester, and Rob Goldberg. Now we have a little time left, and I would like to turn the hosting role over to my Strong Museum colleague, Shane Reinwald from our marketing and communications team to moderate this question and answer period. And I know I've seen some great questions turning up on the screen. So Shane, please take us through.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to our panelists for all of your wonderful remarks so far. And thank you to everyone that has been putting questions in the chat. I've been tracking those along, and I think that they're going to move this discussion forward beautifully. The first question that we have is, what is the significance of the name Shindana? Where did that come from? What was the thought process behind that when creating the company?
It's a Swahili name. That one of our instructors came up with, who was teaching Swahili at the time at Operation Bootstrap. And we were looking for, asking, everybody around us, what could they help us come up with a name? We didn't want just toy company, black toy company, but we wanted something inviting, something that people would ask questions about. What does that mean? Where'd that come from? And our Swahili instructor at the time threw out a few phrases and a few words that we could use, and Shandano was one of them. And when we found that Shandana meant competitor, we were like delighted, let's go with that, because, we are out here doing this to be competitive and to make a difference in the community. And so that's basically how we ended up with the name.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of interest around Mattel's early relationship with Shindana. And one of the questions is, did they provide equipment, funding, specific things for the first factory?
Yeah, initially they did. We started from scratch with them. And from there, we were able to, understand what it is we would need as we developed more dolls. And we were able to get financed so we could buy, new equipment with specific specifications from the designers and people who were working at the factory, what they needed to make the production more easily handled. And the development of what we wanted, where we wanted to take our look, the Black image. And so initially Mattel was there with equipment from their factory that they weren't using, that they shipped over to Shindana, that we eventually or initially incorporated in what we were doing. And from that moment on, we were able to develop some of the equipment that we needed, and we wanted ours to use at our factory.
And you were also able to pay back the amount of money that had been fronted to Mattel, which was significant.
So jumping off that, another great question is, can you talk a little bit about the variety of products? Obviously, Baby Nancy is one of the big reasons that we're having this conversation today, but Shindana Toys created so many others, and what those products meant for the community.
Well, initially, we started with Baby Nancy, and from there, everything just blossomed, and we were looking at other things and other ways to portray Black people and involve, more segments of the community in our depiction of Black life and Black folks. So a whole string of, not just baby dolls, but career dolls and action dolls became a part of how we wanted to develop and what we wanted to develop. And along with that, after the initial breakthrough of Baby Nancy, there was a lot of interest in the professional Black community wanting to see, the depiction of Black folks in other areas also. We grow up, we're not just babies, for the rest of our lives. And, the career dolls, the sports dolls, sports figures, the art figures were all a part of the great imagination that we had about, these dolls going into the public domain. And but it was just an interesting time because there was just so much that we could address. And given the friction, between police, Black community, white community, everything was coming together with these dolls. We were able to, pull people together under one umbrella, basically, and say, we can all do this in a peaceful way, in a happy way, and make some things that make us happy, that we can identify with, but our children, and so it was a very interesting time for the development of these products, because the country was open to everything, and we were able to break through, some of the barriers that had been there for so long. But not only with just the doll itself, but the way the doll was made and the features of these dolls and what these dolls stood for, and for many, that was more important than, where they came from, or, who manufactured them. But their importance as, physical and the imagery that they projected.
Right, and also the dolls would expand over the whole range of human life, especially. I mean, it was like an amazing concept to create dolls that a child from literally almost anywhere in the world could embrace as their own, as part of a whole idea. I think I can say that a major idea behind Bootstrap and Shindan was the whole idea was to find a way to break out of the racial categories and go into what Lou Smith would say, kind of a human category. The real work. It's not just the politics of race, but the real work is the politics of understanding across the idea of race or culture.
Thank you both so much. So we're just at about 2 o'clock, but I would hate to cut the conversation short. So if everyone is willing, I'd love to try to squeeze 1 or 2 more questions in. We have so many great ones popping up in the chat box. But what I'd really love to hear from the panelists is, what do you see as the legacy of Shindana Toys and its most important contributions to the toy industry today? And where do you see the toy industry going as far as diversity?
Well, anybody can answer, right?
Yeah.
Somebody jump in.
Go ahead.
Hi, so I can actually answer that really briefly. I put in the chat that I'm a play therapist. So I've been in the toy realm, I guess, for many years, over 20 years. So I'm a social worker, I'm a play therapist, I'm a Black woman. And I can say this is the question that I have the most. So for example, what I am noticing is, well, there's more, I guess you could say, hue, right? Diversity in hue. There is little diversity in that I've noticed. I won't name the companies that I purchased my toys from mostly, but little diversity in, I guess, the professions, right? So we're seeing, for example, yes, we can celebrate that there's a toy that is an Asian doll, right? An Asian male doll. However, it's usually the Asian male doll with like the computer, laptop, or dressed as a doctor, for example. So there's still some stereotyping that I've noticed, definitely across the board. In most toys that I've seen, even in the past 3 years, there's little diversity when it comes to able-bodied toys, right? So I have maybe one toy, a small figure of a girl in a wheelchair, and so there's not a lot of diversity that I'm seeing that I can access for the diverse population of children that I work with. So there's always room for more. That's what I've been noticing.
Thank you for your insight. That was great. So does anybody on the panel want to tackle the big question of kind of wrapping this up? What is the legacy of Shandano? Obviously you're all trying to get this very important story out there to more people. What is that message that you want people in the industry and just everyday folks studying our history to know about Shindana?
Well, I think it's important, one, to know that the company Shindana had many sort of significant tentacles And, you know, one is Baby Nancy, and the way in which the success of Baby Nancy informed other doll companies to think about ethnic toys. But also the fact that they created a number of different toy items, board games. They were inspired by some of the sort of TV shows that were happening, and they had like a Red Fox doll and some other celebrities of the time, and they really branched out to these other areas of the toy industry. And that, you know, you can do that and you can be very authentic and it can be sustainable. Yes, Shandana did close in the 80s, but it lasted for quite a long time, and that there is a market for it. Because I think one of the things that happened prior to Shindana was this issue of whether or not there's a market for toys that cater to a particular group of people in the country. And I think Shindana proved to many companies, especially big companies, that yes, it is a viable market, and that we should create a product for these markets. The other thing is, I think, you know, I hate, you know, I'm sorry that I'm stressing this, but this was a community effort. That here's a community that got labeled as a place of deficit in the papers, especially after the Watts Rebellion. Like, this is a place of deficit. This is a place of liability. And not just Shindana, but Operation Bootstrap and some of the other sort of organizations that cropped up during that time proved that it was a place of asset. And I think one of the remarkable things that Lou and Robert and some of the other people did in the community was to sort of, you know, challenge that narrative, and sort of empower people to kind of identify what their assets were, and to sort of take action and leverage those assets for the community's greater good. Because, you know, the success of Shindana also supported the ongoing work of Operation Bootstrap. So I would say those are some of the things that I think are very significant and are and takeaways that I would like people to know.
I think I would add to that, in a way, thinking about the Jimmy Walker doll, or the Marla Gibbs doll, or the Red Fox doll that Shindana made during this time period, when those programs, all produced by the pioneering television producer and director Norman Lear, those were the top shows. All in the Family, these are the top shows. Those are all spin-offs of All in the Family. And these were the top shows in the United States, literally number 1, number 2, number 3 in the Nielsen ratings during the 1970s. And at that moment, when these are the most popular toys in the United States, not Mattel, not Hasbro, not Kenner, nobody touched those characters for their, you know, personality celebrity dolls. You know, they made Marie Osmond and Donny Osmond. They made, you know, Dorothy Ham, you know, they made the Bionic Woman. They wouldn't touch the Black characters. And so Shindana stepped up and said, this is important, and we're going to get involved in this. They already, of course, you know, had laid the groundwork to do that kind of thing. But, you know, they have to pay money for those licenses, and you have to build that. Right. So it's important even there to recognize the extent to which they're not just sort of capitalizing on a trend in celebrity dolls to make a buck, but actually contributing in a way that makes them, I mean, in some sense, I would say Shindana was like the Norman Lear of the toy industry in the 1970s, in the way that Norman Lear totally transformed the history of television. We wouldn't have the television we have today without Norman Lear creating and producing, alongside the actors who did so much of the writing as well, you know, Good Times and Sanford and Son and the Jeffersons. We would not have the television we have today. And I think it's the same, it's a very similar, there's a parallel with the toy industry. Without Shindana, we would not have the toys we have today. As for the other question about why you see these are sort of cosmetic gestures toward diversity. and not much more. And they often feel kind of flat and lacking a sort of a richness and authenticity. Is that I think it's really hard when you start with the business model of corporate capitalism, in which as a toy company, you are ultimately accountable only to the shareholders, not to your consumers. Obviously, you need the consumers to buy, but you're not accountable to anybody but the company and profit. I think it's really hard to make the switch over. And you can try to do it, and you can paint them different colors, and you can make molds, and Mattel and other companies would do things, following the Shindana design process. And yet they, unfortunately, they fail in a certain level because they didn't come at it that way from the start. And I think what Yolanda was talking about, that everybody involved in the company, right, came out of Bootstrap, came out of struggle, came out of Freedom Summer in Mississippi with Marva and David. The creativity, the dreams, the democratic striving of this moment was there at the birth of the company. And I just don't think it's possible to adopt that later and be able to achieve what Shindana achieved, or at least not the same qualities. I think it's really hard. There was an ad. There was an ad that Shindana produced in the 70s where they said, there are other black dolls in the market, but our dolls don't just look black; they are black. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a powerful expression of a sort of broader statement. It's not just about blackness or race, but it's about where these dolls come from, what they're made with, the blood, the sweat, the tears, going back to Freedom Summer, going back to incredible times of courage and conviction, and then awful times like the assassination of Malcolm X 3 years earlier. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. One thing I might add, a friend of mine was saying to me, he was saying, there aren't real toys anymore. Toys are video games, or they're watches, or they're other things. Children, the way that we grew up is just kind of doesn't exist very much anymore. And he was just lamenting about the whole idea, the whole tactile experience of having a doll or a certain kind of vehicle, like a tricycle, or made out of wood or some other fashioning that belonged to this tactile time of owning a toy that was very basic in its concept, but very profound in the fact that it was so personalized to the child, and it was so simple in terms of its actual construction. And he was arguing that that was the essence of what toys were about. That's why people like to sit around and jump rope or play jacks or any number of things like that, because they belong to that certain kind of innocence of play that he feels is gone.
Wonderful sentiment. Thank you all so much for staying a little extra, answering these questions, and for your wonderful presentations. I'm going to link to a couple resources in the chat box. Certainly, if any of the panelists have other resources that you think are important, you want to add those there. I know that there are a lot of interested people in the chat right now with questions and who want to follow up and read more about this wonderful history. So please feel free to add those there. And again, thank you also so much.
And
Thank you.
I want to say
Pleasure.
we also have a website, the bootstraphistory.org, and I'll add it to the link if you have further questions. You can just email us.
Well, thank you to Shane for moderating the Q&A. We could have gone on for hours, I think, with fascinating questions and with great insights from our panelists. But I don't want to occupy everyone's entire day, although we could keep going. My special thanks go out to our esteemed members of our panel, Once again, Marva Smith Maxey, David Crittendon, Yolanda Hester, and Rob Goldberg. And thanks to all of you in our audience, all of our participants today. I hope this event will inspire you to come pay a visit to the Strong Museum in person, as that is available. We are open to the public right now. I can hear our carousel running outside my office window. There are happy people of every age, and we continue to provide an rich learning and playful environment to explore all sorts of dimensions of American history. And I also want to encourage all of you to join us in other upcoming online events. And you can find out all about those at museumofplay.org. So thanks again, have a great day, and thanks for helping us explore this really significant part of history and of American culture.